Definition. Normally we define Jews on the basis of the identity they held, the traditions they practiced, the beliefs that they embody in their lives. The Germans defined the Jews biologically based on the religion of their grandparents.
When the regime came to power in January 1933, part of the Nazi movement, the aggressive radical part, the most extreme part, wanted to just expunge the Jews overnight. What they did was they began to legislate against the Jews. And rapidly, the Jews were kicked out of not only the civil service, but of areas of society where there were many Jews: education, universities, teachers, lawyers, doctors. The Jews became something that was not needed. The climax of this early period of legislation was the Nuremberg Laws. The laws were there to determine officially, as the title said, citizenship in Germany, who is a citizen and who is not. But the only definitions that were given of who is a citizen were definitions for who is not a citizen. And the only people defined as not citizens of Germany were Jews. Jews were forced to add the name Israel as a middle name for a man and Sarah as a middle name for a woman from the middle of 1938.
In other times in history, Jews could convert, they could hide themselves by assimilating within the host country. But under racial theory during the Nazi period, Jews were Jews because of the blood that was coursing through their veins. It didn't matter what was in their heart or in their mind, it mattered what was in their blood. So the ultimate extension of this theory was that if you wanted to rid Jews, you couldn't do it through conversion as they did during the Inquisition. You couldn't do it in any other way than to murder them.
There's this gigantic paper trail that goes right down to books for children in schools and popular films and all sorts of things that the Nazis did that didn't always relate directly to the Jews or might relate directly to the Jews, but were part of a comprehensive view of the world in which the Jews not only had no place, but the Jews were almost the anti-human, the anti-German, the anti-Aryan in this world, playing a negative role, and therefore they have a place. They have a place until ultimately they're not going to be there anymore.
Einsatzgruppen, mobile killing units. This is men who slaughter wantonly entire villages, towns, communities, person by person, town by town, bullet by bullet, day by day. No concealment, blatant and brutal, and no effort to disguise what they were doing or what their intentions.
In June of 1941, the Germans invaded the Soviet Union. And by the end of the summer of 1941, there was a wholesale, large-scale murder by individual shooting of a huge number of people. The Einsatzgruppen were essentially mobile offices of the Reich Security main office, and at the beginning of the summer of 1941, began to shoot the men in the villages and cities. The operations continued throughout the summer of 1941, and sometime toward the end of the summer, the nature of the victim changed. Not only were men being killed, but also their wives and mothers and sisters and their children. And by the end of the summer of 1941, there was a wholesale, large-scale murder by individual shooting of a huge number of people.
The Germans engaged in killing methods that were suitable to the geographical, transportation, and public relations context of the area in which they were operating. When it was more efficient to shoot Jews where they were and other victims, the Germans shot them where they were.
One of the pictures taken at what was thought to be an Einsatzgruppen killing shows a soldier pointing a gun at a woman who has a child in her arms. On the back of the photograph is captioned in German, Ivangorod, Ukraine, 1942, Jewish action. This picture was actually found, intercepted in fact, at Warsaw's main post office, where commonly resistance workers opened the letters belonging to German soldiers who were writing letters and sending them from the Eastern Front to their families back home in Germany.
The fact that this photographer, who knew what was happening to these people, who knew what was going to happen to them, calmly recorded their last moments is one of the most chilling, I don't even know what the word is. He possessed the knowledge of their immediate future, their death, and had the calm to focus his camera to make sure that he set the f-stop properly and clicked the shutter. This is, it says something about, I believe, the nature of these operations.
There are those who believe that the Holocaust was born whole. I'm not of that school. I see an awful lot of improvisation. I see an awful lot of experimentation. I see an awful lot of starts and stops, of failures and then of innovation. For example, concentration camps were developed very early. They served multiple functions. One of them was penal colonies, places to arrest massive numbers. The other function of the concentration camps was to essentially provide slave labor and forced labor for German industry. One of the reasons I've always dismissed the defense of we were just following orders is because I don't think it gives an awareness of the creativity involved in doing something that was unprecedented and until that moment never before achieved.
The Nazis developed their own lexicon for many things. Instead of murder, you have words like special treatment or special handling. I think of special treatment, special handling, I think of a postal package, and they're thinking of taking 1,000 Jews and taking them out and shooting them. Resettlement, relocation, beyond the river, beyond the mountains, all sorts of terms like that. Lurking behind those terms was genocide of the Jewish people.
On January 20th, 1942, 80% of the Jews who were to die in the Holocaust were still alive. 16 months later, 4 out of 5 of the Jews who were to die in the Holocaust were already dead. What happened at the Wannsee Conference essentially was the enunciation of the policy, the final solution to the Jewish problem, meaning the murder of all Jews.
The SS bought this house in 1940 as a guest house and as a conference house. They all knew that there was already a mass murder going on in Eastern Europe. No real details had been discussed here at the Wannsee Conference. It was an information on the general line that a decision had been made to kill all European Jews. It is also the moment that the whole German society became involved.
Well, you can see the Wannsee Conference, and of course the place where it took place becomes a symbol, an icon for the premeditated, planned murder of European Jewry. And so in many ways the conference is the symbol of how desk murderers operated, those who had no connection with people and blood carried out their work.
And what you have here, it's the whole organization of the Holocaust starts. This is the guidelines for deportations from Germany to the east. How to deport the Jews, what to do before, what to do with them during the ride on the train, etc. The whole involvement of administration, of banks, of transportation. So there was not one sector in Germany which could say, oh no, we weren't involved in deportation or in the Holocaust. But here you see it was in each and every aspect of society. There was involvement in the Holocaust and in the robbery of those deported.
Deportation. Trains have become a symbol of the Holocaust almost as dramatically as the death camps. Railroads represent what is a novum, the new way of killing that the Nazis invented. In retrospect, the ghettos were a holding pen. They were a reservation containing the Jews until the infrastructure for their destruction was created. Trains became the indispensable link, taking the ghettoized Jews who had been concentrated, who had been deported so they were forced together. And then what happens to them? Trains, deportation, annihilation.
It's no accident that Auschwitz was located where it was. It was on a major rail artery between Krakow and Vienna, and without that infrastructure, they would never have selected Auschwitz as the site for a major facility. Same holds true for Treblinka and Sobibor and Belzec.
Now, when a train came in with 50 or 60 cars, very soon they had a method of splitting the train into portions of 10 to 15 cars, so that not so many people would get out of the cars when they were driven into the camp. Up to 8,000 or 10,000 people were transported in one day. So the average speed is like 20, 25 kilometers per hour. Freight cars were taken because you could lock them from the outside. You seat 40 in a freight car. Now, if you seat 1,000 people, that means you need 20 to 25 freight cars. Within Poland, the figure was different. The police asked the railways to provide them with a train for 5,000 people. And the maximum number of cars you may have due to regulations within a train is 60 cars. 120 axles. So that's 50 to 60 cars, and that means roughly 100 to 110 people in one car. Deportation trains normally over Western Europe and over Germany were regularly accompanied by a detachment of 12 to 15 policemen and one officer. Now, Saturday, even for the SS, was a half day at the time, and they arranged for the railways to keep the Jews into the train until Monday morning, when they had a full day of operation and their weekend was not spoiled by the arrival of the deportation train.
You want to know Hungarian Jewry? 437,402 Jews, 147 trains, 54 days between the 15th of May and the 8th of July. You want to understand the deportation from the Warsaw Ghetto? 23rd of July, 21st of September, again 61 days, 265,000 Jews shipped to Treblinka. You want to understand Belzec, Jews killed? A staff of 104, 14 of them German, 2 known survivors. The statistics tell a brutal, painful, specific, and unavoidable truth. Death camps. I was involved in the reconstruction of the memorial at Belzec. And part of what we discovered underneath in the mass graves of Belzec, we discovered something, a key. Series of keys. Now, we don't ordinarily think of the key as a powerful artifact, but let me tell you a little bit about what a key represents. The victim left home one morning and fully expected someday to return to that home, and that home would still be there, he would still be alive, and it would still be safe. And when you die with your keys, then when you're buried with your keys, you understand that he never imagined, or she never imagined, what fate was awaiting them.
The Nazi system of concentration camps is often misunderstood. Many people conflate the notion of death camp and concentration camp, and they believe that having been sent to a concentration camp was essentially a death sentence. That's not true. There were many survivors of concentration camps, and there were very few survivors of death camps.
Sobor is located in a very remote part of Poland. But it was a site so eerie and so spooky that essentially, even while the Holocaust was taking place, the Germans decided that this place could never be seen, could never be known. So they eradicated the entire camp, they buried the entire camp.
Sobibór was built only for the short moment to make the extermination of thousands of the Jewish people. That's all. It was the fabric of the death. That's all. It's very complicated, you know, that's because we have a lot of knowledge about the another camps. The Sobibór is the definitely different situation, nothing. Then step by step, I think we are coming to the truth of the history of this camp. Very important was that the archaeological excavations. It was the amazing moment for us when we see in the sand the shower head. And this end of the shower must be, should be, and is for me the symbol of the Holocaust, really, about the Holocaust.
Now, a lot of people say the Holocaust never happened and not so many people were killed. It's happened. So I will tell you the process when the train was pushed in, the people were told to go down, leave the luggage in the side. And they promised them that the luggage wouldn't be lost. A German, pretending to be a doctor, he had a white apron, sometimes he had a white uniform, and he had a short speech. He kindly apologized. Because of sanitary reasons, you need to have a shower. Please undress yourself, put your clothing nicely away so you could find it later, and walk with this alley to the shower place. And people didn't know. Sometimes they clapped bravo with the Germans talk so nicely. And they went straight the alley to the gas chamber we called Himmelfahrtstraße, the road to heaven. And at the moment, maybe a minute or two after the after the engine started, I heard a loud scream. But later it subsided. It took about 15 minutes to hear the scream as a scream. Later it was like a bee howl, like a lot of bees. And later was quiet.
If you think about the Holocaust, it's for sure the name of the murder of the European Jews. But the Nazi persecution also enclosed like gypsies and political prisoners and forced labor. So you have a whole world of persecution and murder.
The notion of forced labor and the Holocaust touches in some ways, they interact in some ways, but they're different, they're separate in other ways. The Holocaust is the state-sponsored persecution and annihilation of European Jews. The definition does not include non-Jewish victims. That being said, by 1945, there were no fewer than 8 million foreign laborers, most of them forced laborers, working inside the borders of Germany.
We are here at the Berlin Underworlds Association in one of our bunkers from the World War II period. What you see is an Adrima cupboard. It's an old Adrima, which stands for a dressing machine. It's from a factory that was situated here in Berlin Tempelhof. Years and years after the war, we found this with a lot of drawers, and there were file cards in them made of metal, made of aluminium. That's why they were still there in the year 2000, and they could still be read. 12,000 cards with 12,000 names on it. 12,000 cards all in all, and 4,700 slave workers. On each card, it always said the name of the worker and where he came from, he or she. I have here several name tags in my hand. You always see that there's filed one person on each card. Here, for example, we have Alicja Kolesza. She's from Poland. And I see it by the dates that she has been born in 1928, and she came to Lorenz factory in 45, so she was 17 years old.
The Germans exploited the populations that came under their control. And depending on who you were, you had a different fate. But one of the main means of exploitation was labor. Dora-Mittelbau was the concentration camp that was associated with underground facility that manufactured the V-1 and V-2 rockets. Those who were involved in the creation of the camp itself labored under very, very difficult conditions. Poor air circulation, lots of dust, and many of them perished as a result of their work.
This was built by slave workers. They come from the concentration camp Buchenwald. This area, we are here under a mountain, and this was absolutely saved against the bombs of the Americans or the British. The entrances of the main tunnels in this underground system was blown up by the Soviets in the year 1948. Today you can see only 3 or 4% of the whole underground factory. "35 to 40% of the slave workers, they worked here, died inside of the tunnel system. They never see light. Some people live here only for 3-4 days. They come inside of this mountain, they live here and they died here. They dig out the stones only by hands. They sleep on the cold stones. They haven't had really clothes. There was not possibility that the people can wash. There was not a hospital service like this, there was nothing. And they work here only and died. I cannot imagine how this was possible to exist here for some weeks, for some months. Under the steel construction, you can see here over the water, we have here 13 feet deep water under us. And I think under the water we have a lot of traces, a lot of parts of the rockets they produced here in the past. When I have seen here these rooms, these underground tunnels, for me it's not only a factory or a technical base from the Third Reich. This is a place of death where all victims from the Third Reich died here in the underground.
The Holocaust is the ongoing, unrelenting pursuit of killing, which gradually moved to greater and greater stages of perfection. Auschwitz was 3 camps in one: a penal colony, a slave labor camp, and a death camp. The penal colony was Auschwitz I, used primarily to house Polish prisoners. Bunamanowitz and 40 subcamps were slave labor camps. The third of the camps was Auschwitz II, or Birkenau, which was a death camp. So the idea was that you had a very intricate relationship between slave labor and killing centers. The slave labor drained all mental strength from you, and then they turned you over to the killing center where you died. Rudolf Hess, who was the commandant of Auschwitz, could boast that Auschwitz was the apex of the killing process. And the reason he could do that is essentially because at Auschwitz they killed quickly and they killed cleanly. Auschwitz also, ironically, was the place in which the very infrastructure allowed for it to play its role. There were 44 parallel railroad tracks at Auschwitz. New York's Penn Station has 21, and we all know how many people can arrive at Penn Station on a busy holiday weekend. The largest number of tracks in the United States was 49 parallel tracks at the Chicago Stockades. Auschwitz had 44, which meant that it could handle the people arriving from every corner of Europe and being shipped to Auschwitz.
In Auschwitz you can still see it, how close the interlinking of trains and gas chambers were. They were only 50 meters apart from each other. Now in Auschwitz, there was no such thing as a ramp in the beginning. There was only a cheap wooden platform by the freight station of Auschwitz, and from that platform they would walk overland for a mile or two to the extermination camp in the open. The SS felt, and the commandant of Auschwitz felt, this was not a professional way any longer, and had this siding into the camp be built that now dominates memory and history. The ramp of Auschwitz that we know about, with the gate over the track, was only early in 1944.
The entire operation of Auschwitz sort of has become the symbol of the Holocaust for many. One reason is that because of the nature of the camp, there were many survivors, and their stories have been told, especially in the West. If you go to the former Soviet Union and you talk about the Holocaust, Auschwitz won't be mentioned. Their Holocaust was the individual shooting of Jews near their homes. This is more about memory and how memory is constructed. Far fewer people died at Auschwitz than died being shot by the Einsatzgruppen and their collaborators.
Himmler, as late as October 1943, said to have done what we have done, to have accomplished what we have accomplished, and aside from very few, to have done so in a humane and moral way. This is a chapter of German history, never to be written, never to be told. I have to ask the question, if it's never to be written, never to be told, why do I know about it? Because in the back of the room, even as Himmler said, never to be written, never to be told, there was a large tape recorder of the very old sort that took up lots of space, recording what Himmler had said. Why? Because he was proud of what he was doing, and he wanted to document it for history.
The first large gas chambers in Auschwitz could not start working because the material to burn the corpses was not allowed to be put on train because it was civil business in early 1943. So this burning gear stood in the back of Erfurt in mid-Germany, and it waited for 8 weeks to be shipped to Auschwitz. That was because the railways were short of space, and building a crematorium was not considered to be war effective.
We are at the former administration building of the Topf & Sons company. This was planning office, and now this is a place of remembrance. Altogether, Topf & Sons delivered 25 ovens with 76 incineration chambers. The engineers constructed ovens and techniques for the mass murder the SS hadn't thought about yet. In Auschwitz-Birkenau there were built 4 crematories, and crematory 2 and 3 were the gas chambers in the basement. And to change the poison air with fresh air, they needed a ventilation system. And this system was also delivered by Topf & Sons. Fritz Sander, the department manager, designed a 4-story oven. The corpse should be introduced at the first floor and they should slide downwards. And after a preheating period of 2 days, the corpse introduced should catch fire from the corpse burning below them. We are at the former planning office. On this site, Kurt Prüfer had his working place. Kurt Prüfer stood on the drawing machine like this, and on a clear day when he looked outside the window, he could see the smoke from the chimneys of the crematorium in Buchenwald. When Kurt Prüfer constructed the oven for DSS, he wanted to boost up his income, and he wanted to be recognized as a good engineer, and he wanted to deliver a product based on the needs of the SS, and he knew about the circumstances in the camps. Zyklon B, the gas, needs a temperature of 26 degrees to develop its fatal effect. And Kurt Prüfer knew this, so he suggests the SS in Auschwitz-Birkenau to preheat the gas chambers with the wasted heat from the ovens. He worked out this construction in his free time at home.
In May, June 1944, the numbers of people being gassed and burnt at Birkenau reached a climax. There was more than, I think, 132,000 bodies per month. In order to cope with this, pyres were lit. It was in the autumn of that year, 1944, that the Sonderkommando took photographs of the pyres, the bodies being burnt. They did this obviously clandestinely. They did it through the window of a barracks close to the pyre being lit. But it wasn't until later, until the 1980s, that it was realised the actual full frame of the photograph. In the frame of the photographs, you can actually see the window of the frame and the bodies being burnt.
I think there's a misunderstanding about Auschwitz that the SS who worked there, all they did was supervise prisoners and take people to the gas chambers, and that's just not true. They put in their time, they did their work, and then when work was over, there were book fairs, there were SS games. We have records that, make sure that you keep your dogs on a leash, make sure that the female guards should not visit you in your quarters unsupervised.
I wanted to narrate their story to tell what happened to them. Over time, I understood that you couldn't tell the victim's story without also telling the story of the killers. And I became fascinated not by the inhumanity of the killers, but by the humanity of the killers. If all of the killers were sadists and demonically evil, then the world would be more protected from the implications of the Holocaust, because it wouldn't say that ordinary men, given extraordinary circumstances, could become systematic killers. To understand that they had an Auschwitz self, which was a systematic killing self, and then the self that could flirt with young women, that could schmooze with their colleagues, that could enjoy themselves and relax, that presents a human challenge to us, because it means that ordinary men and women have the capacity to do the most extraordinary things, awful things, evil things, horrific things.
many Germans who had access to the knowledge about the concentration camps were shocked by the physical enormity and horror. And we're not looking only at sight, but smell and hearing as well of what was done in their name to represent them. And if you were to connect this today to a generation of Germans who are the grandchildren or even great-grandchildren of this generation, there's still the issue that this was done in the name of Germany.
This is the urn which has to be used.
This is a part of my history. I'm opposed to it, but I must deal with it.
It's not just the history of their country, it's the history of their family. And so they confront very complicated emotional issues. They understand the history and they feel, in many cases, special responsibility to guard against anything that could emerge that would echo that history.
This is the biggest collection in original form about the victims of the Nazi period. In a concentration camp like Dachau, Buchenwald, Bergen-Belsen and so on, all was written down from the Nazis. The victims lost their names and they become numbers. And we see today many of persons who write to us are the second or the third generation. They say, I want to know what's happened with my grandpa. Therefore, we need the documentation.
But we have here in the ITS around 2,000 of these envelopes with effects, from wallets with photos up to watches, rings, small bracelets, etc. Now we are doing a re-identification round of these effects. It's very hard because you have to identify first the people on the photos, whereas you have sometimes the original effects envelopes from the camps where very efficient bureaucracy, you have the name of the camp inmate. Like here, you know, it was a camp inmate from concentration camp Neuengamme. He left this small watch, a small ring, and some other valuables which are not in this envelope anymore, so they were taken away.
Let me talk deeply personally about where I first came face to face with the presence of absence. My father died in 1990. I'm a religious Jew. We observe the mourning period by sitting at home and receiving guests for 7 days. It's called Shiva. First Friday night, we sat down to dinner, and you don't mourn on the Sabbath. I was there, my children were there, my wife was there, my mother was there, my sister was there. and my father's chair was empty. And we literally couldn't eat until my mother said, "You sit in your father's chair." Because my father's absence loomed larger than anybody present. You come to Sobibor, it's empty. You can barely imagine or fathom what is there. But that absence shows a presence, and the ghosts are there, the images are there, the souls are there, the evil is there, the magnitude of what happened is there, even if it's unseen. If you look today at the sites of destruction, there is a paradox. It is the presence of absence and the absence of presence. You see something, and what you see is also what's not there. And if you don't see something, then that looms present for you in an extraordinary way.
I'm not Jewish. Nobody in my family fought in World War II that I know of, so I really don't have a personal connection to this history. But I think when you handle artifacts every day, you can't help but have a personal connection to this. Numbers are too big to understand. 6 million, 11 million, it's too big to understand. An artifact that somebody held, something that someone owned, something that someone wrote, gives you empathy. That act connects me with someone long ago who did the exact same thing and whose life was cut short. I don't think numbers can get you at humanity. And because the Holocaust is the most well-documented crime in history, I am convinced that the truth is in there. I may not ever know why, but there's something in there that will help me stop that happening to other people. There's gotta be.